Hello everyone, it's time for another live look at the astrology. My name is Katie Sweetman, and this is your look at the astrology for February 9th through 15th, 2026. This is my take two. Just wanted to err on the side of caution because somebody said that the video was glitching, and I checked everything. It should be fine. So we're just going to go ahead because we have a lot of important things to talk about. And that's why I wanted to make sure that the audio and everything was as good as it needed to be. So for those that don't know who I am, my name is Katie Sweetman, and I'm an astrologer and psychic medium located here in the rolling hills of Central Maryland. And every week we gather live to look at the astrology. You hear me say it every week. The astrology is 50%. You are the other 50%. Why do we have a lot to talk about? Because this is the week that Saturn changes signs. It goes from Pisces, where it's been since March of 2023, and it goes into Aries on February 13th for my side of the world, for perhaps your side of the world, so Europe and Asia and Australia, New Zealand, it will be the 14th of February. So you all maybe know that I love astrology. I love astrology. I love Saturn. And why do I love Saturn? Because Saturn for me as an astrologer, it really gives so much. And maybe because learning astrology growing up, certainly, I'm going to date myself for a moment, but the books that I had around as a teenager were the books that were written in the 60s and 70s. So this would have been your Linda Goodman era stuff. And that level of astrology, while important, it's personality level of astrology. And Saturn, each planet of the zodiac plays a role. Saturn talks about time. It talks about lessons, framework, structure, and you're like, why the heck do you love Saturn so much? Because especially as an astrologer, especially as somebody who works with clients one-on-one, it's really through Saturn that you see the life. You see the life get built. You see what somebody can become, the potential of what somebody can become. And I think I said this in my take one, the zodiac, it's like a ladder. Each sign is progressive in the sense that we step into the next sign and it builds upon the next. And when I was teaching my Saturn masterclass, whether it was back in 2022 to 2024, I taught the zodiac, and I think people thought, oh wait, I thought this was about Saturn. The zodiac is the space in which Saturn builds. And so we need to understand the zodiac in order to understand Saturn. So this week, Saturn changing signs says that this is the start of something. Mind you, we had Saturn in Aries. This would have been May 24th, 2025 until September 1st of 2025. That was our first, let's say, 3-month preview. If you are in the United States, I tell my clients who are in the US, like, what were you doing between Memorial Day and Labor Day? Because we saw the seeds of something new during that time. A lot of people scratch their heads and they're like, no, I was on vacation. I don't know what I was doing. But perhaps when you look back, maybe as we get a little bit further into Saturn and Aries, you will see what was building during the summer, or for those of you all who are in the Southern Hemisphere, in the winter of 2025. So Saturn changes signs this week, and Saturn is going to shift our priorities because wherever Saturn is, its role is to teach us about life. We start the astrological year in Aries. We do that astrological year in a year. We build our understanding. The sun shines through each of the 12 signs, and it builds life and all of its experiences. The sun shines through each zodiac sign like a lens. And so that lens becomes a way for us to understand ourselves, to understand the world around us and how life evolves around us and how we participate in life. But Saturn takes 29.5 years to go through each of the 12 zodiac signs. In a way, if the zodiac is the wheel of life, Saturn turns that great wheel. I don't know why it's still skipping. So the audio will hopefully be well on my end. So Saturn turns the great wheel of life. And so Saturn is turning the wheel for us, and in a way it's taking us all the way one cycle since April of 1996. Yes, April of 1996. That was the month that Saturn first went into Aries, the previous cycle. So we're not living Saturn throughout the course of a year. We are living Saturn over the course of a much greater arc of time. And again, if the zodiac is a ladder, Saturn helps us to take one step, one step, one step. And I know I've said already that Saturn is lessons, but we need lessons. And sometimes I'll make a comment when I'm teaching about Saturn. I was like, y'all know those kids that had a parent that never told them no? What types of adults do these kids grow up to become? So we need that sort of externality of Saturn to teach us to grow up and to mature. Now, on a, let's say, a more deeper spiritual level, why am I here? What is the meaning and purpose of my life? It's not to say that Saturn is the meaning and purpose of your life, but Saturn talks about the structure in which you build that meaning and purpose of your life. Saturn isn't just the lessons, it is also that throughout the arc of your life, who do you have the potential to become? A mentor, a leader, somebody who has built a particular life, somebody who has not built a particular life, but Saturn is there time after time to really build our experiences here in the physical world. So when we got to Saturn in Pisces back in March of 2023, March 7th of 2023, in a way we had then stepped into that final step in the ladder. And I've said this periodically over the last couple of years. Saturn, or rather Pisces, is not an easy sign. Saturn in Pisces is not an easy place for Saturn to be because the lessons are not material. They're not analytical. They're not going to make sense. And even as I say sometimes that Saturn in Pisces has been to make peace, I know our immediate reaction is, how can I make peace? How can I make peace with everything that's happening? But to make peace is not to make peace with what's happening externally. It's to find the peace within. And that's why Saturn in Pisces can be a rather high step up for everybody. So at this point, and this is something to reflect on, especially as you go through the next couple of days, because Saturn will leave Pisces on February 13th, 14th, again, for those that are in Europe, Asia, Australia, New Zealand, and also I know we have some people in Africa too. Saturn, whatever has begun to, let me get that thought back. Saturn is beginning to bring the lesson to a close. It's possible that we are seeing something begin to come together. We can sort of listen. I think I was saying this in my take one. We can sort of listen for what this time has been about. I know what I was saying when I cut off the first time is Saturn in Pisces has had a pretty predictable framework. It went into Pisces on March 7th of 2023. It turned retrograde. I think it was June 17th of 2023. It turned direct in early November of 2023. It turned retrograde at the end of June, I think, very end of June of 2024. It turned direct in November of 2024. It turned retrograde. It sort of went into Aries. It turned retrograde in July of 2025. It was back in Pisces on September 1st of 2025. And then Saturn turned direct on, I think it was November 27th of this year, last year, 2025. So those dates, when you look back and sort of place it against the timeline of your life, things were building around those dates. Things were building that were either very personal to your own astrology, whether it's from your rising sign, whether it's from your sun sign, or building along these themes of Saturn and Pisces to step into a sign that asks more of us. Because if the zodiac is the wheel of life, ultimately we're trying to get off the wheel. And so Saturn, as sort of that progressive side of Saturn, is saying when we learn the lessons, when we integrate them, when we're able to fully step into Saturn and Pisces, or Pisces just as a sign in general, we can detach and to release ourselves from the wheel and from the cycle of incarnation. It's symbolic, maybe it's literal, but it's certainly symbolic. And that's the thing, that now as Saturn is at the very end of Pisces, we can live, Pisces in a moment. It sort of talks about the end of our day. It talks about the moment right before we wake up. But we can also live Pisces in a lifetime. This sort of bigger search for what's the meaning and purpose of my life? Why am I here? And that's another thing about Saturn and Pisces. It's really asked of us big existential questions. Doesn't mean perhaps we have the answers. I feel that Pisces speaks a little bit in riddles sometimes. That's the thing about Pisces, is that the answers aren't analytical. That's the role of Aquarius. Aquarius is to give you facts and data and analysis, but Aquarius is not the last sign of the zodiac. In order to really make our completion, we have to go through Pisces. We can't skip Pisces. We can't skip the retreat, the inner search. We can't, the meditation, the seeking, the exploring, the trying to make sense again out of our lives, and even to make peace with the past, and maybe it's even to find inner peace. But then that great cycle begins to shift on the 13th, 14th, because then Saturn goes into Aries and we start the climb again. I know 30 years is a big time, but for Saturn in Aries, it will be in Aries until April 2028. We all have something that we will be working on and prioritizing for the next 2 years. Saturn typically, I would say, just to sort of compare and contrast, eclipses, we will have an eclipse next week. Like I said, a lot of things going on. Eclipses push things to the front burner. It says, this is now your priority. You need to deal with this. This is where the changes are happening. Saturn is a little bit more measured. It's a little bit like, oh, suddenly I want to start doing things that are different in my life. And even as I go through each of the 12 zodiac signs, you may start to hear yourself like, wait a second, I'm starting to sort of reach out towards that. I give you an example. I feel like even past times where Saturn's about to go into a new sign, and let's say for a client, it's Saturn going into a relationship sign. And somebody will say to me, like, I'm really starting to think about getting into a serious relationship. I haven't wanted a serious relationship for a while, or it's been a long time since I've been in a serious relationship. And so Saturn going into the relationship sign, just as an example, it's not saying that you must be in a serious relationship. Saturn is saying it's time to take this part of your life seriously. So whether that's to bring a partner in or just to prioritize relationships as a broader topic, that's how Saturn can begin to reflect a shift in narrative in this part of your life. And I'm going to say this as a Scorpio for a moment. It's not to sound morbid, but Saturn is like the events of your life that build your obituary. You get a degree, you start a career, you get achievements, maybe you get married, maybe you have kids, maybe you just do something else. It's the things that really build the sort of structural points of your life. So we need Saturn. We need Saturn to sort of whisper into our ear and remind us to be accountable, to be a better version of ourselves, to put things in balance, to do more of one thing, to do less of another. Saturn for some people is sobriety, for example. We need Saturn to really tell us about what's right and wrong, and to set boundaries, and to really show us what is the result of when we cross those boundaries. For example, we need Saturn to teach us about commitment. What does it mean to make a commitment? What does it mean to follow through in that commitment and to honor that commitment? We need Saturn to teach us about time, how we live time. Both sometimes people say to me, time is a construct. And I'm like, time, we have the sunrise, we have the sunset, we have midday, we have midnight, and those 4 points are immutable. These are not constructs. These are physiological points. But how you live time is a construct, in the sense that it is what you make of it. So we are resetting the great cycle We are starting again with Aries, and Aries says that it's time to take action. It's time to stand on our own 2 feet, to be accountable, to have responsibility, to work on our relationship with Aries. What does that mean? Aries is an archetype, even if you're thinking, but I have nothing in Aries. Aries is you get out of bed in the morning, you go after what you want, you have a well-defined sense of your desires, your wants, and your needs. Yes, Aries can rush forward. Yes, Aries can be impatient, but Aries is typically trying to inspire us to do the hard thing or to be brave and courageous. There are different nuances of Aries as an archetype, but that's a couple of the examples I can give to talk about how we are reprioritizing things for the next couple of years. So when we look back at February of 2026, we may not see anything, but maybe when we sort of consider the first few months of 2026, we actually do start to see a shift. For some signs, they really will feel that it is a new time. These are typically going to be the cardinal signs. Cardinal signs are your Aries, your Cancer, your Libra, and your Capricorns. The seeds will be planted for something new. Again, even if we don't see it right away, we may have to get a couple of months in, especially after April 9th, because April 9th is when Mars will also get into Aries. And so we'll have Mars, we'll have Saturn, we'll have Neptune. I realize I have not even talked about Neptune and Aries. It's kind of like you need to sort of put the individual ingredients first. And so then we can have a little bit more of a complex discussion, because Neptune in the mix is really a question mark. Saturn and Neptune come together every, I think it's like 38, 37 years, so just about 40 years. The last Saturn-Neptune conjunction we had was in 1989. Before that would have been like 1952, I think. So it's not something that happens very often, but Saturn and Neptune will be making what's called a conjunction. So they're coming together at 0 Aries on February 20th. So that's more things to talk about, but we will talk about that later. So what else we can talk about? This idea that between now and the 13th, we're still at 29 of Pisces. 29 of Pisces is the last degree of the zodiac. It is the last degree of the sign. It is a space of endings. It is the space of letting go. You may feel that there is a very different quality to, let's say, Friday onwards and into next week versus where we are symbolically with Saturn and Pisces. Because again, if the zodiac is a ladder, when we reach the top of that ladder with Saturn and Pisces, ultimately, hopefully, it is to reach a sign that is about, in its highest expression, about unity, about the search for meaning and purpose, that inner search that we all have. Because when we start to get into the latter signs of the zodiac, and this is Sagittarius onward, we are in a part of the zodiac that's very external. We are trying to find our place in the world. We're trying to make sense and meaning and purpose of our place in the world. And so that's why it's a very existential, very subtle, very subjective sign of the zodiac. And yet here we are, we're in Aquarius season. And Aquarius is more about the intellect, more about the rational, more about analysis. But Pisces is the last sign of the zodiac. So Saturn and Aries, I did actually do a whole big webinar on Saturn and Aries. So it's 3 hours plus. It's not all that you have to watch all 3 hours. It's part of that is a sign by sign guide for what this means for your sign. And for those who are going into what's called their first or second Saturn return, it means you have Saturn and Aries when you're born. And the Saturn return, whether it's the first or second, there's different. It's very pivotal and critical times in anybody's life. Because in particular, the first Saturn return, age 29, 30, 28, 29, 30, it's when you get handed the contract of life. And Saturn says sign. And you do. We all do. And so if you're going into the second Saturn return, it's when you have to account for the last 30 years. So my first Saturn return, people cohort, you're going to be born in April 96 all the way, I think it's April 99, maybe with a couple of exceptions. If you were born in 1966 to 1968, and Saturn roughly was in Aries during that time. I think in 69 it starts to go into Taurus. I have to go check and look. So there you go. That is your look at the astrology. We do have Venus going into Libra, Venus going into Pisces this week. It's one of those signs that we're actually beginning to shift out of Aquarius season. Venus is what you love, what you value, what you want to spend time and money on. And Venus going to Pisces reminds us that one of the highest values of Venus and Pisces is unconditional love. Of course, we're human beings. It's not always easy to reach that high bar of unconditional love, but it's a reminder that that's where Venus really does its best work. It is to help, it is to be of service, it is to invest in the things that actually have substance, have meaning and purpose. For example, as I said earlier, we are a week off from a solar eclipse. Solar eclipses are really big points in the year. We typically just have 2 solar eclipses each year. Of course, there are exceptions, but in the case of 2026, we have 2 solar eclipses, February 17th, 2026, and August 12th of 2026. And solar eclipses work in the 6-month chapters, so we are closing out a solar eclipse chapter that began on September 21st of 2025. This was through the lens of Virgo, and now we are shifting into an eclipse period that's going to be through the lens of Aquarius for the next 6 months. This means that we are shifting out of the Virgo Pisces eclipses that we have been going through since the end of 2024. And whatever this eclipse, the solar eclipse, is, the seeds that it's planting are part of a new story. It sort of reinforces and echoes whatever is happening with Saturn in Aries. Neptune is now in Aries. We have this solar eclipse in Aquarius. So there's so much going on. And it's one of those things where it's just to begin to listen, to observe, to take note. It's not necessarily to expect anything or even to expect anything dramatically, but we can sort of know that something is beginning to change. And wherever that eclipse, and we'll talk more about this next week, wherever that eclipse falls, that area will change in some degree or fashion over the next 6 and sometimes the next 6+ months. So the time just before an eclipse, kind of like Saturn at 29 Pisces, is just a very liminal time. Things are moving in, moving out. I will say I sometimes use the stage metaphor to talk about eclipses in the sense that now the curtain is coming down on one act. We're about to prepare for the next act, but there's still that sense of anticipation for what is going to be when the curtain comes up, and that will be on February 17th. Before I forget, I did a free webinar on Thursday, so just a few days ago. This is on an introduction to energetic sciences. I also teach about energy and consciousness. It's not just to theoretically learn about energy and consciousness, it's actually to learn really powerful tools and also the mechanics behind it, and more importantly, to learn about the weft, which is the 6th element. It is the element that fills, the energy that fills everything that we perceive as empty. It is the fabric of reality, and even to learn how to be like an acupuncture needle for the planet. And so for those that feel sort of called or to learn more about this work, you can watch the introduction. The link is in the show notes, or you can go to my website, empoweringastrology.com. I am doing a weekend intensive, so just a little under 2 weeks from now, so February 21st through 22nd. It is going to be a 2-day intensive to teach you these tools, to learn the information behind it, to be able to discover the WAF, to be able to shift our consciousness and to have a very different, perhaps, definition of what consciousness is, and even to open up our sixth sense, which is our super consciousness. So the link is in the show notes. This is again a module 1 level, a level 1 intensive, February 21st through 22nd. It is hosted by Mercia Academy in Switzerland. So like I said, lots to cover. So let's go through each of the 12 zodiac signs, starting with Aries. So Aries, big news, you're about to have a long-term visitor to your sign. So we talked about this last week. Saturn has come to the end of its time in Pisces. You've reached the end of a great personal chapter, maybe one that you, if you're old enough, you can go back and reflect on, let's say 1996 onwards, at least since March of 2023, when Saturn entered your sign of spirituality, release, endings, and letting go. Every Aries has lived this time differently. There's no sort of cookie cutter interpretation for the astrology, but there's certainly common points. And to know that this has been a time of endings, it's also to prepare you for new beginnings. For example, if you have felt that life of late has been a little bit liminal, like things are beginning to happen but not quite happening, see how you start to feel the second half of February and even into March and April. Saturn going into your sign is a big deal because now it's saying that you need to take the next big step up in your life. We all have a different relationship with Saturn. Maybe you don't have the best relationship with commitment or follow through, or maybe you're really great with taking the lead and taking responsibility. And to some degree, Saturn in your sign is an assessment, sort of a marker, and Saturn is beginning to show you what is working, what is not working, what is out of balance, because Saturn always wants things in balance. To be fair, Saturn in your sign is a bit of a climb, and Saturn is saying we need to really start to move towards something that is more disciplined or has greater leadership and authority, or to put things in order. Saturn doesn't like messes, for example. It might be a little different if you are an Aries sun versus an Aries rising. Sometimes when it's Aries rising, you feel that you just have a lot of things on your plate. If you are going into Saturn and Aries with a lot of things on your plate, how do you begin to say no to what you need to say no to and say yes to what you really need to say yes to? It's not about taking things on to the point of collapse. Of course not, because again, Saturn loves things to be in balance. You may feel, though, that it's like all on you, and maybe that's a good thing. Maybe you really need that sense of strong self-reliance. But then there's also Saturn if you are sun sign Aries, and I'm just sort of putting on my traditional astrology hat for a moment and saying, if Saturn is going into your sun sign, you want to really, to eat your Wheaties, take your vitamins, make sure you're getting, taking care of your health and wellness, because sometimes when Saturn is in our sun sign, it can diminish or at least symbolically reflect a time where we are not we're not as strong, we're not as vital, for example. But really positive things can happen when Saturn goes into our signs, because we start to take things seriously. We take our health seriously. We take our life seriously. We start to cut things out. We start to do more of the things we're supposed to do, for example. But it is a big shift that really marks a turning point to some degree in your life. It may be worthwhile, as an aside, to go back to, say, 2023, 2024, and into the first few months of 2025, because you had eclipses in Aries. And I feel that these eclipses were kind of like the run-up to something, because then Saturn going into the signs can sometimes make more real or concrete the seeds that were planted 2023 for into the very beginning of 2025. What else? We are very close to an eclipse. This eclipse will be in your 11th sign of community, friends, society, social issues, and causes. We will talk about this next week because there is just a lot to talk about. So there you go, Aries. Taurus. Taurus. So Venus is your planet, and this week Venus is changing signs. It's going into Pisces, and for you, Taurus, Pisces is something called your 11th sign. To be fair, Venus loves to be in Pisces. It's the sign of its exaltation, and that energy for Taurus really, does its best work when it's put towards community and friendships and being involved in your community, maybe getting involved in social issues and causes or volunteering, for example. But for at least the next, I think it's 3-4 weeks, the energy of Venus is really pointing you out towards the world. Maybe it's social, maybe it's busy, maybe it's sort of bigger humanitarian topics, or maybe you're just looking towards the future and hoping and dreaming and planning for the next personal year to come when it's your birthday season. But we need to talk about Saturn in Aries. So Saturn is going to go into what's called your 12th sign. Your 12th sign is your last sign. It is the sign of spirituality, release, letting go, retreats, going inward. It is the last space because it represents a completion. It is a space that inherently is outside of this world. So to some degree, and I know that every Taurus is different, you've stepped into a period that takes you into April of 2028, and that's when Saturn will go into Taurus, where it is to let go. That means different things to different Tauruses. Taurus is typically very driven by the material. Of course, not all Tauruses, but I feel like I got a list of Tauruses in my brain where you guys got a lot of stuff, and I'm saying so as a Scorpio. And so it is to really unburden yourself. So whether that's to physically unburden yourself, sometimes I tell people when Saturn goes to the 12th, I say, it's like you're going through the boxes of the last 30 years. And I once said that to a client, and he said, I'm literally going through the boxes of the house that I moved into 30 years ago because we're going to prepare to move. That is both a literal statement, this idea of going through the boxes, but also it's a metaphoric statement. What are you carrying with you? What do you not want to bring with you when Saturn goes into Taurus in April of 2028? I realize that's 2 years from now. I got time. If Saturn talks about priorities, Saturn is saying it's time to prioritize your spiritual life, your search for meaning and purpose. It is to make peace within yourself, to make peace with the things that maybe you have carried. Again, going back to this idea of unburdening yourself. It is to prioritize rest, going within, retreat. Again, it's to listen for how this time unfolds. There's a liminality when Saturn goes to the 12th. There's a sense that you're building things, but at the same time, maybe they're not quite concrete. Or maybe I always talk about the building sandcastles along the shore metaphor, in the sense that you build something and then the sea just washes it away. And that can be very Zen. That can be very philosophical or even spiritual in that sense. But sometimes there's the sense that things are kind of washing away. It depends. This is not going to be the case for every Taurus or Taurus rising. We are about a week off from a solar eclipse. This is a big deal eclipse that will be both in the part of your astrology that talks about your responsibilities, your public life, your career, the role that you play in the world. It also talks about you because it's pointing to some degree about Uranus and Taurus and that last gasp, so to speak, of Uranus and Taurus. But we will talk more about this next week. Gemini. So here we are. It is the last few days of Saturn in your 10th. So this has been about 3 years of figuring out what you want to be when you grow up. Every Gemini has lived this time differently. You've had Geminis who have made career changes. You've had Geminis who have stepped into greater roles of responsibility. You've had Geminis who have needed to really define the role that they want to play in the world. But in general, the push with Saturn in Pisces since 2023 is to become more mature. And that narrative is shifting away because then Saturn goes into your 11th sign. In our astrology, we have even though we might be a Gemini or Gemini rising, let's not forget that there are 11 other signs. Each of those signs act as different domains of our life. They act as different points of view. And in reality, we are all 12 signs. So your 10th sign is career. Saturn in the 10th was about prioritizing your public professional life and your maturity and your public growth and responsibility. In the 11th, the priority now is community, society, humanity, social issues, social causes. It can be on a very surface level, your friends and your social network. On a deeper level, it is to take more of a accountability or even authority and a responsibility. That's the word we're looking for, responsibility in your community or even on a larger framework, depending on who you are. Sometimes, and to go back to this mention about friendship, Saturn going into the 11th, and you would have seen a preview of this in June and July and August of 2025, so last year. Saturn in the 11th, sometimes Saturn goes through your contact list and starts to symbolically delete people. Because what Saturn is trying to show you is you want the people in your life to be rock solid. No surface relationships, no frenemies, no, even if this idea, or rather the role of community in your life is not quite well formed, Saturn is like, this is your priority. It is to make serious relationships. It is to really clear out the people that really are not supporting and nourishing your life, or maybe aren't even aligned with your life. That's not to say that that's going to be the case for every Gemini or Gemini rising, but I've seen it many times as an astrologer, so this is why I am mentioning it. It's a great time to make new friends, to make new community, to take the time to put the work in to build this part of your life. And for some, it is to really take action, because Aries is action, to really take action in the world and on a level that feels like it's aligned with some sort of greater mission and purpose. So we are a week off from a solar eclipse. We will talk more about that next week, but the energies, the vibes, they are shifting and changing this week, and February in general is a very important month. Cancer. So the moon is your planet, and the moon this week is going from Scorpio. So we're actually at the last quarter moon before an eclipse. And I didn't talk about that because, I think if Saturn weren't going into Aries, I would have led with that more and then led into the eclipse more. But Saturn going into Aries is such a big deal. And for you, this is, with Pisces since March of 2023, Saturn went through what's called your 9th. I said this, I think, with Gemini, and I'll say it for you. Even though you are a Cancer or Cancer rising, you are all 12 signs of the zodiac, and all those signs represent different domains of your life. So over the past 3 years, Saturn was in your 9th, and so your priority for the past 3 years was philosophical. It could have been about education. It could have been about getting a degree. It could have been about education just as a broader topic, and how you educate yourself and what you know, and really pushing yourself to learn something. Maybe it was to find your authority in what you have to say, what you have to share, what you have to speak. And maybe it's really to define what's right and wrong. What do you believe in? What do you stand for? And perhaps even matters of faith. Saturn going into your 10th on February 13th, 14th says the priorities now shift. And for Cancer in particular, it is a big shift. And the shift goes towards your career. It doesn't have to be just career. The 10th is also your public life, your public reputation. It is a title after your name. It is the role that you play in this world. Whether that's parent, whether that's CEO, whether that's shoemaker, whatever it is, Saturn is saying it's time for you to find your place in the world. And for some people, the next 2 years until April 2028 will really mark career milestones. For some people, it's a big push to find your maturity, to find your authority, to stand in a role, even if that is, sometimes I remember the first time I taught a class. This would have been in 2013. Taught a class as an astrologer, but I think that was probably the first time I taught a class. And I go into the room and there are people there already, and I'm just sort of in this sort of hanging out mode. And then I suddenly realize, wait a second, they're here for me. And that sort of realization quickly puts you into a space within yourself that you need to start to occupy. And I sort of share that because Saturn is saying to you, if the 10th is your priority of career, responsibility, maturity, accountability is your priority for the next 2 years, how do you begin to occupy that space in your life? Because title is title. You can give a title to anybody. But there's people that occupy that title and occupy it well. There's people that don't occupy that title and occupy it really poorly. And so it's to really step into a space within yourself, occupy it, but also do it really well and with accountability and authority. I will add that we are also 1 week off from the solar eclipse, so things are a little bit nutty at the moment. Maybe you're really feeling this energy building, but we will talk more about this next week. Leo, so the sun is your planet, and right now it's Aquarius season, and it's about relationships, it's about socialization, other people in your life. It's been a bit busy, certainly once Mars got into that space back on January 23rd. But the real story right now is Saturn going it's leaving your 8th, which maybe Leo is like, hallelujah, because Saturn has prioritized your emotional health and wellness over the past 3 years, but it's also prioritized deep inner work. The real true power of the 8th, it's not intimacy, although intimacy is important. It's not wealth, although to some degree wealth is important, but you can't take it with you. The real power of the 8th is to transform yourself, to get into the deepest parts of yourself and to make a change. And so that's where you've been since March of 2023. It's been a time of spiritual alchemy. It's been a crucible. It's stripped layers away. You're not the same person that you were going into the 8th in March of 2023. Saturn going into your 9th now shifts the priorities on February 13th all the way to April of 2028. And it's saying, what do you believe in? What do you stand for? What do you think is true? For some Leos, the next 2 years could be educational. You go back to school, you get a degree, you get a lot of specialized training, you get the certificate, you get all the education that you need in order to have the title that goes with it. For some Leos, it's more philosophical. I need to get very clear about, everything that I've been through. What do I now stand for? Because who I was and how I saw the world in 2023 maybe doesn't match who I am and how I see the world now. For some Leos, the next 2 years are about a lot of travel, and not just vacation travel, but really serious travel that builds towards, again, what do you believe in? What do you stand for? For some Leos, it's matters of faith, truth, meaning, or it's a need to publish all the ideas that you have gathered, or that book that you've been working on, or that treatise, or that teaching that you've been forming. Now it's time to put out there, because the 9th is a space of preachers, it's the space of lawyers, it's the space of teachers. And it's not to say that you need to be either of those 3 roles, but you may see themes of those 3 roles throughout the next couple of years. We are 1 week off from a solar eclipse. Solar eclipses are big deals. They shift the narrative, and just things are a bit strange at the moment. But this eclipse is going to be in your sign of relationships. It's talking about how relationships are going to be a bigger focus as you go even into 2028. That's another story for another time. And in 2026 in particular, you're having eclipses in Aquarius and Leo. Hey, you're a Leo. So it is a dynamic year, or will be a dynamic year for you, Leo. Virgo. So Mercury is your planet, and Mercury is right now in Pisces. It's actually going to spend 2 months in Pisces, because I believe it's the end of February. Yes, the 28th of February that Mercury will go retrograde. So get used to Pisces. Pisces is your relationship sign. You're like, yes, I'm really well versed in my relationship sign, because Saturn has been there for 3 years. Every Virgo has lived this time differently, but Saturn has said to Virgo, this space is your priority. March of 2023 to February 13th, 14th of 2026. Maybe you have gotten into a partnership, a serious relationship. Maybe you got married. Maybe you ended a relationship or ended a marriage. But whatever is happening, even if it's none of the above, it's where you really had to prioritize the role and the function, and to set boundaries and to define what relationships mean to you. Because in general, at least according to how the zodiac is structured, relationships are incredibly important. We can't do life alone. And so this has been a time to really build that and to redefine that, and maybe new people or even different people are in your life as you close out Saturn and Pisces this week than were in your life at the start of 2023. Saturn going into Aries is a priority shift for you. It's a priority shift for everybody, but now the priority shift is going towards something called your eighth. In our astrology, yes, you are a Virgo sun or a Virgo rising. You are all 12 signs. Each of the other 11 signs represent the different domains of your life. So Pisces is your relationship sign. Aries is your sign where you transform yourself. It is as if, although you had a preview of this June and July and August, it is as if you are going into what I call the eighth room. You have entered or will enter a space that is designed to transform you. In order for you to be transformed, there's a lot of inner searching, a lot of inner reflection. This is the alchemy of the soul. The deepest and I think the most powerful role of the eighth is to really get us into spaces that we wouldn't typically go into. If you're the type of Virgo that takes all your emotions and feelings and everything that's ever happened to you and you compartmentalize and you push it over here, and then you're like, I will deal with this later. And then Saturn's like, nope, you're going to deal with this now. So you might need to prioritize your emotional health and wellness over the next 2 years. You start therapy, or you start talking to somebody, or you really start to journal and to get into your feelings and not to analyze your feelings, because that is a Virgo. Virgo likes to do that, but it is to feel your feelings, to truly feel your feelings. And the eighth is also intimacy. It's themes around power and control. It's sexuality. It's the things that happen behind closed doors, but it also can be wealth. It can also be all the complicated themes around money and even debt as well. And so for some Virgos, it's really about the financial matters over the next 2 years. For some Virgos, it's really about the emotional and spiritual matters over the next 2 years. For some Virgos, it's to get a little messy, and that's actually good, because it's through that stripping away of control, because Virgo are secret Scorpios. You cannot control this process. You can participate in it, you can co-create in it, but you cannot control this process, Virgo. And who you emerge in 2028 is a very different part of yourself. So do the soul searching. Get intimate with yourself, be vulnerable, open up, take the things that you have been compartmentalizing and prioritize them, because Saturn is here and it's saying that it's time. We are a week away from a solar eclipse, so things are just in general a little wacky. So there might be a sense that things are there's a sense of transition, new things are coming into focus, and it sort of adds to that sort of sense that, I feel like I had this conversation with Virgo clients lately. Virgo likes to have the plan. That's how they maintain control. But sometimes we have life, capital L life, where we can't be in control. And that's part of the magic, that's part of the alchemy, is to let go of control. Libra. So Venus is your planet, and Venus is in Pisces, or at least will be in Pisces. I think it is the 11th. I didn't write it down. It'll be in Pisces in the middle of this week, and it will turn your energy towards work and projects and health and wellness, and sort of takes you away from a lot of this more, let's say, creative energy, or taking a break, going on vacation energy that maybe you've had over the past few weeks. It is time for work. It is time to take things seriously. This is a space that Saturn has been in, and we'll leave this week, but Saturn has been in your space of work and projects and health and wellness since March of 2023. So that era is beginning to come to a close. And as it does, what have you learned? What have you learned about health and wellness? What have you learned about work and projects, for example? Saturn going into Aries on February 13th, 14th is a big deal because Aries is something called your relationship sign. You are a Libra or a Libra sun, but don't forget that in reality, you are all 12 signs of the zodiac. They act, all the other signs, 11 around you, act as the different domains of your life. Saturn going into Aries says that your priority over the next 2 years is relationship. This is going to mean different things to different Libras. It says that either you need to prioritize relationship because you can't do life alone. We need to have a connection. We need to form strong bonds with other people. It doesn't have to be a romantic relationship. It could mean that you're really good at prioritizing everybody else and sometimes losing yourself in the mix. Prioritizing relationship doesn't mean deprioritizing yourself. It just means putting it back into balance. For some Libras, it is a major milestone in the relationship. There's a marriage, there's a baby, there's a move, there's a divorce. That's, of course, neither some of those things or none of those things are going to be relevant. It really depends on who you are. But Saturn is like the inspector. And if you're going into Saturn Aries and a relationship is on really shaky ground, you either put the work in and you put things back in order, or maybe Saturn is showing you that it's not working anymore. We will see. You did have Saturn in Aries, just for a preview, June, July, and August of 2025, so just last year. And if something came up around relationships, or maybe you met somebody, or maybe you started to think about relationships differently, those were the seeds that Saturn is now going to build upon, for example. But when you look back at this time, you will begin to see a pivot and shift because, symbolically speaking, Saturn is now going into the top half of your zodiac wheel. It's been on the bottom half all the way since 2011, 2012, 2010, and this has been a time over the last 14 years where it's been more about your inner world, family, home, starting a family, going inward. But now it really depends on your personal astrology, but just in general, it's about going out into the world. I will also add that we are 1 week away from a solar eclipse, so things are really beginning to shift and move, and in general, February is a very powerful month. Scorpio. So Mars is your planet, and Mars right now is in Aquarius. Aquarius is something called your 4th sign. It's been in Aquarius since January 23rd, and it will be in Aquarius, your 4th sign of home and family, until the beginning of March. So Mars is you, or it takes your energy and it puts it towards your home environment. So your immediate priority is your family, or it's your living situation. You're moving, you're making renovations, you're really looking at ancestry, you're doing a lot of inner work and transformation around, past and memories, for example. If Mars is your short-term priorities, even though Mars rules you, Saturn changing signs this week and going into Aries talks about a shift in your long-term priorities. Over the past 3 years, it's been more about defining well who you are. What are your talents and gifts and abilities? What's passion? What's that spark of life? How do you shine? It's been, for some also about identity, but that begins to shift because Saturn is going to go in your 6th. And so for the next 2 years, your long-term priority is health and wellness, how you take care of your day-to-day life. This includes eating your vegetables, brushing your teeth, not in that order, a sense of order and structure in your day-to-day life. It could be service and helping people. It could be really becoming more present and mindful in your day-to-day life. But Saturn sometimes is saying you need to take this part of your life seriously. For example, if you have been neglecting health and wellness, you do things you know you shouldn't be doing. I'm not here to tell you what to do, but maybe Saturn is saying that's not a good long-term strategy, Scorpio. Maybe it's time for a checkup. Maybe it's time for a detox. Maybe it's time for a clean out of the closets, because it's time to create a little bit more order and structure in your life. We are 1 week away from a solar eclipse. This is a very powerful solar eclipse that says home and family are going to be a much bigger focus and priority into the next 6 months. And that eclipse will be next week on the 17th. We'll talk about that more next week. Sagittarius, so Jupiter is your planet, and Jupiter, it's right now in Cancer. It's going to be in Cancer until the end of June, and for you, Cancer is something called your 8th sign. In general, Sag or Sag rising, the energy of the past, say, 6 months, since June of 2025, has been pointed more inward. It's a good time to focus on your emotional health and wellness. It's a time to look at legacies and inheritances. I mean that more from an emotional level, but maybe it's physical, monetary as well. It could be about finances. You're really focusing on getting your finances in order, but that's going to shift at the end of June. We're not there yet, but that's to sort of place you into the larger framework. The big news this week is Saturn going into Aries. So for you, since March of 2023, you have been in a major time in your astrology where home and family have been the priority. You have lived this in your own way. I've shared some of my own personal experiences where I've moved. I had to sort of have a father who's older and not well, and that's been the priority. But it's I think a little bit hard for Sag, because typically Sag is a sign, although not all Sag, that likes freedom, it likes to travel, it likes to do its own thing. But Saturn has been saying you really need to prioritize your roots. And this has been 3 years. So that actually begins to change, because Saturn goes into your 5th sign on February 13th, 14th, and the focus and priority for the next 2 years until April of 2028 will be yourself. I don't mean this to be selfish. I don't mean this to sort of put yourself first, but really prioritizing your talents, your gifts, your abilities, defining who you are, how you express who you are, your creativity, your persona, your identity. This space is a little bit harder to concretely define because it's so subjective. It's you have to really get back to the things that light you up and give you joy. And that's your priority, Sagittarius, maybe because it's just been a really heavy 3 years and you just need to get back to the things that actually give you some joy, give you some life. For some Sag or Sag risings, not all, of course, because this is very specific, it could be a pregnancy. It could be creativity is to produce a baby, for example. It could be children, just as a larger topic, but this is in general a space that says we need to get back to the spark of life. We need to really feel who it is that we truly are versus maybe what people think we should be, or perhaps how we were raised to be. And it's to really, again, define your identity. We are 1 week away from a solar eclipse, so there's just a lot of bigger shifts and movements. We, of course, have Saturn going into Aries this week, but February in general is a big month where we will see pivots and transitions, maybe not right away, but the seeds will be planted. Capricorn, so big news because Saturn is your planet, and Saturn this week on February 13th, 14th, it goes into Aries. You have had since, let's go way back, let's go to the very, very end of 2017 into the beginning of 2018, Saturn has been going through the bottom of your astrology. The past, 7 years has been more about the formation of self, new chapters, but now Saturn going into Aries says that your priority for the next 2 years is family, home, roots, foundation. Whether you need to move or to set up a household, maybe you're starting a family, it could be more emotional. You need to really prioritize that inner root, that emotional root. Maybe it's looking at ancestral patterns. But this is really marking a shift in your personal astrology in the sense that the energy now focuses on a different part of your astrology, a different sort of domain, sort of cluster of domains in your astrology that are more about your inner world and defining who you are in that home and your health and wellness. But this is going to take you even into the beginning of the next decade. I'm getting ahead of myself. The next couple of years will likely bring personal milestones. Again, it could be a move. It could be the start of a family. But it's for you to begin to listen for what this time means for you. It has been 3 years of Saturn in Pisces. This has been to develop your voice. It's been also to really prioritize your education, to learn, to build information, to write, to speak, to communicate. And I've noticed this, and I know I've said this a few times already, that Saturn also through the third is about important choices, about the commitments that we make, and sometimes how choices can really send us one way or the other. So the choices that you have been making over the last 3 years are really setting up this transition into Saturn and Aries. We are 1 week away from a solar eclipse. That's big news. We'll talk more about this next week, but that's why February 2026 in general is a time of bigger shifts, transformations, really bringing us into the start of a new era. I know that's a big statement. We got other things going on, and the seeds are being planted right now. Aquarius. So Saturn is your planet. And so big news, Saturn is changing signs. It's going into Aries. It's been in Pisces for the last 3 years. And Aries is something called your third sign. So let's sort of rewind for a second. Saturn was, or has been at least until Friday the 13th or 14th, depending on how we look at it. It has been in your second sign of money, income, material stability, and security. That to some degree for Aquarius has been quite literal. You've had to really boost your income or make investments, or you made big purchases, because the second is also the things that we own. Or it's been philosophical. You need to get clear about what's really important to you and what's not important to you. The second is where we invest, not invest in the terms of the eighth. It's like invest in the things that are more immediate and more important in our life. Aquarius has also needed to find stability and security in its life, or to redefine its relationship with what those words mean. Nevertheless, things have shifted over the past couple of years, but with Saturn going into Aries, the priority now is education. You're either taking a lot of classes over the next couple of years, you're building your information, your knowledge, maybe it's communication, you're working on finding your voice, maybe you're writing, you're speaking, you're doing podcasts, you're writing a manuscript, you're teaching, maybe it's about teaching in general, but it could be creating a lot of movement and transition over the next couple of years. And I've noticed when Saturn goes through the third, it's also about the choices that you're making, because the choices are what really build our life. And with Saturn and the third, it's also to really become like a master of your choices, to be able to discern what is a good choice for you and what is not a good choice for you. Because sometimes to be able to make good choices is something that takes time. Aquarius, you're at the end, almost the end of the zodiac, so you have a little bit more wisdom and knowledge than, say, one of the first few signs of the zodiac, just symbolically speaking. It doesn't mean that you always make the best choices, but that might be one of the ways in which we can look at Saturn's time in Aries. We are 1 week away from a solar eclipse. This is going to be an Aquarius new moon. Hey, you're an Aquarius, and this new moon is also a solar eclipse. So we've talked a little bit about this. Having an eclipse in your sign is a big deal. It happens every 8-9 years. These eclipses, we had eclipses in Aquarius and Leo. Leo is the sign that's opposite you in 2017 and 18. Eclipses have a half cycle, 8-9 years. They have a full cycle of 18 years. So we have to go back even to 2008, 2009, and even I think into 2010 to see eclipses in Aquarius and Leo. Typically, when we have eclipses in our sign, it's dynamic. It's a time of new beginnings. Things are happening. And here's the reality, Aquarius. It's quite possible that you're already seeing them. I can sort of go through my mind with Aquarius clients, and they've already made the move. They've already made the big changes in their life. And sometimes the eclipse happens before the eclipse. So maybe you've already seen this, but maybe you haven't. And so the seeds of something new are being planted right now. Things are shifting, and maybe with Saturn in Aries, which is a very different sign than Pisces, is going to give you a different focus and different point of view than you have had the past 3 years with Saturn in Aries, Saturn in Pisces. Pisces, so last sign, a lot of big things happening right now for Pisces because Saturn, after 3 years, is leaving Pisces. And it's just been a very heavy lift in general for Pisces rising since March of 2023. It was March 7th of 2023 when Saturn first went into Pisces. And it really has said to you over the last 3 years, it's time to take life seriously. Maybe that is to stand on your own 2 feet. Maybe that is to feel that you have the responsibility and you maybe can't quite rely on other people. Maybe there have been very major events and milestones because you've also had eclipses in Pisces in the past couple of years as well. Maybe your life has taken a turn, but 2023, 4, and 5 was about new beginnings. That's beginning to shift. And if Saturn is our priority, Saturn and Pisces said the priority is you. It's your life. It's showing up. It's doing the right thing. It's finding your accountability. And Saturn in the second, which it moves into the second on February 13th, 14th, it says your priority is now money, income, material stability, and security. This isn't about materialism. It doesn't mean that you must make money or you have to have all this money. No, Saturn is saying to you that our financial part of our life, the material part of our life, even if it's just the concept of safety, stability, and security, is an important foundational part of life. The second is more about the basics, a roof over our head, a sense of resource or money that we can get the basics that we need. We have food, we have shelter, we have water. I mean, of course, we should be so lucky because not everybody has that. So Saturn is saying to you, you need to prioritize this part of your life. For some people, that is to make a budget. For some other people, that is to get very clear about what's important to you and what's not important to you, materially speaking. It could have a philosophical element in the sense that the things that you valued at the start of 2026 is not what you value as you get into the middle of 2028. For some Pisces, you make a big purchase, you buy a home, you create property, you get property, you have sort of that material, that very traditional material side of Saturn going through the second. For some Pisces, it's to get very lean, to really look at what you're spending your time and money in, and maybe, not putting it in the ways that you've been putting it before. That's why I said for some Pisces, it's to make a budget. For some Pisces, it's about self-worth and value, and really to take yourself seriously, to take your value seriously. And Saturn is always about boundaries and to set healthy boundaries. We are also 1 week away from a solar eclipse. The solar eclipse is going to be in something called your 12th. This is a bigger conversation, but just as a reminder, in 2026, the eclipses are pulling away from Pisces and Virgo, so pulling away from you. We will not have we'll have an eclipse in Pisces in August, so we have time, but there is more of a narrative in 2026 about health and wellness and taking care of yourself. So just wanted to put that on your radar. It is shifting away from this sort of bigger narrative about relationships, but we will talk more about that next week. So there you go. That is your look at the astrology of this week. This is my take 2. And yeah, maybe there were some good points that I started to talk about in my take one. But like I said, we have Saturn going into Aries this week. It is a big deal. You know I love Saturn. I would be remiss if I didn't speak in depth about Saturn, but Saturn is our priorities. General, conventional wisdom as your astrologer. Take Saturn seriously, take your priorities seriously. If Saturn's saying, do more of this or less of this, it's usually a good plan. But Saturn ultimately, it talks about who can we become. It takes time, it takes effort, and hopefully a lot of love, and a lot of dedication, a lot of attention to detail. And we are made through Saturn. It doesn't mean that Saturn is our finality, but Saturn really talks about our time here on the physical plane. So there you go. That is your look at the astrology of this week, February 9th through 15th of 2026. Big month. We'll have more to talk about next week, especially in advance of the solar eclipse on February 17th. So until then, take care. Bye-bye.